Okay, welcome to today's class where we're going to be making this hot water bottle cozy. Now, during the video, this is the one we're going to make, and I use Bosal Polytherm wadding in this one. Now, this does make for a very thick hot water bottle, and you're going through a lot of layers, thick layers. So if you don't think your machine would be able to handle that, then use a much thinner wadding like Vliseline's H640 or H630, or a standard like thin cotton batting quilt wadding that you would use in quilts, things like that, to make one that's much thinner like this one. If you don't have your hot water bottle red hot, then you can get away with using a thinner wadding which will go under your machine a lot easier. This first one I made with thinner wadding. I made this one with H640, which is slightly thicker than the H630, the Vliseline iron-on wadding. But this one's made with Bosal Polytherm. It's got, my husband requested, he wanted it to be quite thick because he puts quite a hot water bottle up against his back because of an injury. So he needed quite a thick one. But it is quite thick. Okay, supplies that you'll need. Tools for today's class are quite minimal. You'll need clips and pins, or I've used both. You'll need some masking tape for quilting. I've used quite a wide one. It's just like a painter decorator masking tape. I've used 1/4 inch quilter's tape to help add the bias binding, just to make it a little bit easier. You don't have to have that. You could use a fabric glue pen instead, or just use pins and clips. I've used 505 temporary glue spray to help hold the fabric and the wadding together. If you're using an iron-on wadding, then you won't need that. Scissors, just scissors and snips. A printout, obviously, of your pattern. Coordinating thread to your fabric and to your binding if it's a different colour. And I think that's about it. Oh, a walking foot for your machine. If you've got a walking foot, that will make this a whole lot easier because we've got quite a lot of layers to get through. Okay, so you need to print out your pattern pieces. There are 5 pattern pieces, and there should be 1 sheet with a picture on as well. Okay, so you should have top left front, top right front, left lower front, and right lower front. And then you should also have the top back panel. Okay, so print them out. If your printer gives you options, you want to print out at actual size or 100%, whichever option it gives you. You will have a test square on your left lower front. This measures 1 inch, so yours should measure 1 inch. If it's larger or smaller, you need to change your settings because it should measure exactly 1 inch to make sure that your template comes out at the right size. Once you've done that, you need to cut out all your pieces. So these are your main 4 pieces for your front panel, and then your back panel has got the 2 overlapping pieces. So what you'll have is these 4. I've not cut this one out just because it doesn't need assembling. So you're just going to take a glue stick or take some sellotape. You're going to stick the left lower front onto the right lower front, just over there on that panel where it says to stick here. And then you're going to do the same with the top left front. Stick that onto the top right front in the area that's been designated. Your lines should line up, all your lines should line up. And then when you've stuck them all together, the bottom section sticks over the top section there at that line there. Now this fold line here, this dash line, this is where you're going to fold the top section down to make this back panel here. Okay, so you'll just, when you need to cut out that piece, you'll just fold this piece above the dash line down behind this section, and then that will give you the section for this piece here. And then this pattern piece is for your top flap just there. Okay, so to make this hot water bottle cover, all you'll need is 2 fat quarters of fabric, approximately 18 inches tall by 22 inches wide. So you'll need one for the outer, one for the lining. I'm using 100% quilting cotton. And you'll also need 2 pieces of wadding, both fat quarter size as well. I'm using Bosal Polytherm. The silver side helps reflect the heat back in. Okay, you're also going to need approximately 20 inches of bias binding. So this is pre-bought bias binding. It doesn't have to be bias binding that's cut on the bias. You could make your own out of fabric. This one's already folded to the centre, so you want to have approximately, when it's folded in half an inch. If you're making your own, if you cut a piece 20 inches long, 2 inches wide, and then you would fold the long edges to the centre and then fold the 2 folded edges together like that, and you'll end up with like a ½ inch piece of binding. It doesn't need to be cut on the bias because it doesn't need to stretch. It's only going to be sewn on in a straight line. So we're going to quilt our fabric, quilt it all together. So you want, if you're using Polytherm like me, you want your outer fabric right side up, and then you're going to get your, if you're using Polytherm like me, you want your silver side facing inwards. So you're going to have the back of that wadding against the back of your outer fabric. And then for your lining, you want your lining wrong side up, right side down on your table. Also going to get your wadding, and you're going to put that with the silver side against the back of your lining this time, because that's going to be pointing inwards. Okay, so we want everything pointing towards. If you're using the Polytherm, you want your silver sides pointing towards the lining. Basically helps keep the heat in the hot water bottle for longer, so that you it doesn't go cold too quick, and it helps stop it if you've got it directly against your skin. It helps stop you burning yourself as well. So right side fabric, if you're just using a cotton wadding or a polyester wadding, just put them 2 pieces in between your fabrics. So outer fabric on top, then your 2 pieces of wadding, that's like that, and then your lining underneath. Make sure everything's lined up. Try and get it as lined up as possible. Just try and line it up. I mean, everything might not be completely straight, but if you line everything up in one corner, I'm going to let that overhang, then we should be roughly straight. Okay, smooth it out. Now if you need to, you can adhere the fabrics with a little bit of temporary spray, glue spray, the 505 glue spray like you can use for your quilting. That will help hold it in place while you're quilting, so it's less likely to pucker. Okay, so we're just going to quilt this all together. Now it is quite thick. If you have a walking foot that you can put on your machine, this is my walking foot. If you've not and you struggle, you might find if you can just use 1 layer wadding. If not, you can try and make sure you keep it taut and go slowly, so you can push out any wrinkles as you go. But this is why we're going to quilt it before we cut the pieces out, because if it pushes the fabric, if you don't have one of these, as you're quilting, it can push the fabric like that. You can see it wrinkling as you go, and it's likely to push the fabric as you go. At least it'll push it all to the bottom, the fabric's slightly bigger, and then you can cut it out afterwards and hopefully avoid any of those. Okay, so we're just going to quilt it first before we do anything else. So you want to thread in the top to match top fabric, and then in your bobbin underneath, if you pick a thread to match your lining fabric, then you'll be ready to go. Okay, so now to quilt this, to make your life easy, I've just got some wide masking tape, some painter's masking tape. Now, you can get it in different widths, so I've got a wide one. So if you stick a piece at an angle across the centre like that, then when you sew, if you sew with your foot up against that line, all the way down. That'll keep you in a straight line. And then once you've finished that line, you can take off your masking tape, and then you can move this along, line it up with the line that you've just stitched, and then stitch along. So your stitch line will be here, and then you can stitch along that line again, and you'll get nice straight lines, and just keep moving it along and lining it up with your stitch line as you go, and you'll get a nice straight line quilt pattern without having to draw any lines on. You can draw your lines on if you want to with chalk, but it takes quite a lot of time. But you can go this way, and then you can switch and then go back the other way, and you might only use 1 or 2 pieces of your tape. Okay, so I'm going to be quilting this today on my industrial sewing machine, just because I have a permanent walking foot on this. It's a walking foot industrial machine, so this is basically going to do exactly the same as it will on your domestic machine with your walking foot. Okay, so you want to set your stitch length of your stitch to approximately, I'd say, between 4 and 5 millimetre, depending on what your machine will do. Mine's set to, I think I'm going to set mine to 5. Gives a nice long stitch length, and it stands out. It looks quite effective rather than a little one. You could do a shorter one if you require. I'm going to start off the fabric. I'm just going to start off. Oh, helps if you put your foot down, and then just stitch with your foot up against the edge of your masking tape. And as you can see, it's walking. Your walking foot will do the same thing. You still want to try and keep it relatively flat. I kind of try and smooth it out and keep it relatively taut. If you've stuck this down with 505 tape, it should be easier. But hopefully, using a walking foot, you won't get all that push where it ripples at the front. You might get it a little bit because it's quite thick, but nowhere near as much as if you didn't. I'm just going to cut my thread here. Okay, so once you've stitched your first line, take your tape off, and then you're going to move it down, line it up with the stitch line that you've just made, and then this time again you're just going to stitch along this edge now. So then again you would just stitch, move your masking tape along to line up with that line, and again stitch, then repeat going across the other side till you've done that way, and then you'll then switch, turn your tape to go in the opposite direction and go the opposite way if you want a diamond pattern. If you don't, just do all your stitch lines going in one direction, and you could just leave it like that. You could even use, if you use like a wide tape like this, and then use an inch wide tape as well. You could do 1 inch to one of these, the 2 inch wide. It comes out slightly wider because of the width of your foot. And then you could put an inch piece of tape, and then put the wider one, and then the narrower one, and it'll give you different effects, a bit more like a plaid effect if you use a narrower one as well. So just keep going until you've filled your entire piece of fabric, and you'll have stitched through both layers. Okay, so there's my quilt lines. For speed for the video, I've just done the lines just going in one direction. You could say you could go on and put them into a diamond pattern if you want. Also, if you just use the width of your foot, you could also just do straight lines like here. Okay, so now you want to take your template, your main template. Yours will look better than mine. This is my initial one. And then we're going to cut out, you could cut out the pieces. Okay, so I'm going to get that as close to the edge as I can. And then I'm just going to pin that or weight that, but I'm going to pin it down because I want to cut it out with scissors. I'm also going to cut, this is your other piece of template. This gives you your flap, your top flap on the back, and then for your bottom flap, you'll have a line where to fold it, and then this will go here, and this will be your bottom piece as well. Okay, so if you line that up there and then put your top piece next to it, you'll know you've got enough room for everything. And then check. Yep, there's enough room for that. You can see how much the fabric draws in when you're quilting. That's why we quilt first. And we are doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Therefore, if your seams go slightly over the edge of the fabric, it won't matter. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to use my extra long glass head pins because they're just a bit stronger for going through all these layers. It's these yellow ones here. And then I'm just going to pin this in place in a few places. Okay, so that's that one pinned in place. I'm just going to leave that one there, and I'm going to cut right up against the edge of this one. So I know now I've got enough there for the other one. And then I'm just going to cut this out with my scissors. I like to cut generally with my pattern to the right side of my scissors, as I'm right-handed. You can get really close to the edge then. Okay, so that's my main piece cut out. Take the pins out. So that's our main piece, our back, our front. So put that aside, and you're going to take your template, and where it says you'll have a fold line here, fold that down, and that will give you your pieces, your bottom piece for the back, and then just line those up. You can get them quite close again, and then just rinse and repeat, so to speak. So pin that. Now I've done mine on thin card, so that's quite hard to pin. Okay, so that's those cut out. Take the pins out. That's your templates finished with. So you now should have 3 pieces. So you've got your front and your 2 back pieces. There we go. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is attach our pieces of binding. So if you're working from the back, the next thing you want to do is open out your binding. And then we're just going to clip this along the edge. So just open. You've got these 2 folded edges on your binding, or if you've made your own, your 2 folding pieces. Just fold one out, and then we're going to clip it along the edge. We're working on the back here. Okay, I'm going to do both pieces, just so we can work on both of them at the same time. Okay, so that's both pieces clipped. Just flip them over to the other side. Make sure, like here, this puckered up the fabric on the other side. Just make sure you correct that first. It's always worth checking that you haven't done that. Okay, check this one. See, it's done it here as well on the corner. Gone under the fabric a bit there. So let's straighten all that up. Go back to this side and check. Okay, so that's all pretty much lined up. And then we're just going to stitch that now. Okay, so I'm back at the machine. My walking foot's still on. So you can see the fold line you've got here. That's where you're going to stitch in that fold line there. So you need to get the whole thing under your foot. Make sure you don't rock up your fabric underneath when you do this. You might want to change to a matching thread. I could change to black now if you didn't want to see it. And then alter your stitch length if you want to do. I'm just going to leave mine as it is for the moment. When you're stitching it on, you might want to go down to your usual stitch length of about 2.5, 3 mil. Switch my machine on. Okay, and then we're just going to stitch along that fold line. So you can just follow that. If you have trouble getting through all these layers, you might want to put a needle in, an 80 or a 90 or a jeans needle maybe even, as it's getting thicker. Okay, so that's there. And then I'm just going to grab the other piece and just continue stitching straight onto this piece. Okay, just snip that. Snip it in between. Okay, so you've got your 2 pieces there. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to turn it over to the right side and bring your binding all the way around and pull it over until it crosses that stitch line just ever so slightly. If you find that hard to do, then get your scissors or a ruler and your rotary cutter so it's straight, and you could trim a little bit from the edge. Just trim that down, that seam allowance, just a little bit, and it will fit easier. So I'm just going to trim that off. Okay, I've just stitched mine the first time and I wasn't happy with it, it slipped. So I'm going to use 1/4 inch quilting tape this time. Put it just inside this stitch line. You could use a glue pen, a fabric glue pen as well. Okay, and then fold your bias tape, your bias binding down, so it just crosses your line, your stitch line. Okay, so I'm still going to add my clips, turn them over that way so they're upside down, because we're going to stitch it from the other side. But it shouldn't shift now because it's now got that quilting tape in place. So we'll go again. Okay, now like I say, you would put, like if you were doing black like me, you would possibly put use black cotton thread, but I'm doing it in white so that you can see my stitch line. Okay, keep your foot lined up with the edge at about 1/8 of an inch. Okay, there we go. There we go, that's worked perfectly that time. So I've got a nice, neat, even line. You can't see my stitch line underneath, not unless you flick that back anyway. And you've got a nice, neat stitch line there. So that we're just going to repeat that on this one. Okay, so that's both pieces done. So just trim them straight at the ends and then we'll be ready to put it together. Okay, so now we're going to put everything together. So you want to put your main piece on your table, right side up, and then we're going to attach the other 2 pieces, and they're going to be right side down, wrong side up. So it's the wrong side that you'll see. So now when you look at your cover, the one that is over the top is the one that you need to sew on first. So if you want this one over the top, this is the one you'll lay on first. If you want this top piece like mine over the top, this is the one that you will put down first. So that's going to be there. Just line everything up and then get your bottom piece, and this is the one that'll be behind. Now if you're not sure and you can't remember, once you've lined them up like that, just turn them over that way and you can see this one goes over the top of this one. So that's how they need to be laid out. Now this is quite bulky now. This is making a really thick sandwich layer, so you will need definitely need your walking foot to do this. Okay, so we're just going to clip everything together to hold it into place. Clip a pin. Pins might not get all the way around though, because it is quite thick. It's because of your 2 layers of wadding. Now I'm going to do this on my regular sewing machine so that you know it can be done on your regular sewing machine, as I've been using my industrial. I'm just going to do this on my regular sewing machine. I'll nip over to that. Okay, so I'm sat at my machine, at my domestic machine. I've put my walking foot on. This sticker here, this on my machine is put at my 1/2 inch away from my needle line, so I know if I butt up against that, I'm doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've set my stitch length to about 3mm to make sure I get through all this. You've got quite thick layers, so just press it down, lift your foot as high as it'll go. I'm just going to start in the centre at the bottom, get it under your foot. Okay, and then just start stitching. Now I'm stitching in black so you can see it. So do a couple of stitches and then do a couple of back stitches. Don't try and go fast with a walking foot. Just take your time. You will have to keep stopping. Turning your foot, turning your project as you go around the curve. You can see those little things going up and down there. They're what's walking the foot. You just can't see it very much because it's quite thick. Might increase my stitch length up a bit to 3.5. And I want something to hold this down with. I'm just going to use my snips. Stitching around the curves is probably the hardest bit. This is just me trying to compress it a little bit, and I'm pushing against a cat. He's looking a bit peeved now because it's interfering with his sleep. May have to help it with a little bit of a push because it's quite thick. Okay, I'm going to turn a bit here. Don't worry too much if your line increases. This is going to be up inside and you're not really going to see it. Okay. Now I've done my seam allowance a bit big there. If you need to, lift your foot and turn. Okay, and then back stitch. Okay, so we've gone through quite a lot of thick layers there. Now mine's not the straightest at the top here. You could take a bit more time and make sure that all lines up. I might actually stitch over that again if you get a wonky line like that. I'm going to start here and try and make that seam line better. So I'll just do a few back stitches there. I went way off my 1/2 inch line there. So I'm going to go back. I want to know that my bottle will fit. Okay, that's better. And then just go back over a few of these stitches, a back stitch. And then I'm just going to unpick those few stitches there. Okay, there we go. That's them few stitches unpicked. So that should be okay now. Okay, so just to finish this off now, if you've got any pinking shears, you might want to just use them on the corners, if they'll go through all the layers. On the corners, on the curves, just so it sits nice and neater. So it sits neater on the other side. If it won't, then you can just snip into the seam allowance, and you may want to trim your seam allowance down to about 1/4 inch. If you want to take some of the wadding out of the seams, that's up to yourself. I didn't bother. So once you get onto your curves, if the pinking shears don't work, you can just go and put snip lines in your curves with your scissors. Don't cut through your stitches. Just snip through up to your stitches so that it will bend. You can always go through, you know, a couple of layers at once. You don't have to go through it all at once if it's too hard on your hands. So I'm just going to trim that seam allowance down. Now you could, if you had an overlocker, you could go round and finish this off on your overlocker, and which would do all this trimming at the same time. You could cut this bit off. You could go round and zigzag the edges, because this is a raw edge. Sew it with a zigzag stitch if you want to, or an overcast stitch over the edge, or you could use bias binding if you like bias binding, and you could bind all the edges. I'm not worrying too much about how neat and tidy this is, because this is down inside. You could obviously take more time than I'm taking here. This one's going to be for my husband. Okay, so you could go around and snip all your curves. You could do it on one side, and then you could flip it over and do it on the other side. You haven't got to try and cut through all those layers in one go. So I would go around and do the curves at the bottom as well if you need to do, and then we've just got to turn it through. Turn it to the right side, and as you'll see, all these disappear down inside anyway. Okay, give everything a good press. Okay, there you go. So there's your hot water bottle cover. Feels all thick and cosy. Now, just push those out a bit. So if you do struggle, that's a lot of bulk under there. This one was much thinner. Use a thinner wadding. This is really quite thick, this one, using the thermal, the Polytherm from Bosal. It gives you a really thick finish, but this is what my husband requested because he's using it up against his back quite a lot. So put your hot water bottle in. Okay, there you go. There's your bottle in. That's the bottle in. Takes a bit of manoeuvring to get it in, but once it's in, you should only really need to pull it out at the top to change it, refill it. There we go. And it obviously it comes out when you want to give it a wash. So there you go. So I hope you enjoyed that today. Like I say, if you make one and you find it's way too thick, go on to a thinner, use a thinner wadding. This one's got much thinner wadding in. Don't forget to share yours in our Facebook group, Woolly Elephant Crafters.